Good morning. It is Monday, January the 14th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. Speaking to all you butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. Once upon a time, the teacher of Moses called upon mankind with a warning. At a certain date, he said, all the water in the world, which had not been specially hoarded, would disappear. It would then be renewed with different water, which would drive men mad. Only one man listened to the meaning of this advice. He collected water and went to a secure place where he stored it and waited for the water to change its character. On the appointed date, the streams stopped running. The wells went dry, and the man who had listened, seeing this happening, went to his retreat and drank his preserved water. When he saw from his security, the waterfalls again beginning to flow, this man descended among the other sons of men. He found that they were thinking and talking in an entirely different way from before, yet they had no memory of what had happened, nor of having been warned. When he tried to talk to them, he realized that they thought he was mad, and they showed hostility or compassion, not understanding. At first he drank none of the new water, but went back to his concealment to draw on his supplies every day. Finally, however, he took the decision to drink the new water, because he could not bear the loneliness of living, behaving, and thinking in a different way from everyone else. He drank the new water and became like the rest. Then he forgot all about his own store of special water, and his fellows began to look upon him as a madman who had miraculously been restored to sanity. And that sums up the true nature of the battle in this country today. It is not a battle over politics, but over sanity. So I was looking at the stock market and checking my investments and whatnot this morning, and the stock market's been crazy over the past couple of months, basically since November. It's been up 500 points, down 500 points, and then it's sideways. It doesn't know which way it wants to go. And a lot of this is because of the changes that Donald Trump has brought about. He went ahead and redid NAFTA. That created turmoil in the markets. Seems like almost everything that he's doing is creating market turmoil. And one of the reasons that the market is now in turmoil is because of China. And we're sort of there's a timeout that China and the United States have come to with regards to a trade war. And so until March, it's like a 90-day truce, is the way it's been defined. And so ostensibly by March, we'll have hopefully some kind of an agreement, and things will get back to normal. But until then, things are going to remain uncertain, and the markets hate uncertainty. That means my investments are taking a pounding. And I keep thinking to myself, then there's the issue of the wall and some other things. And I think to myself, I voted for Trump, and I'll vote for him again in 2020, maybe. But it all depends on whether or not Donald Trump is going to come through, because he has put me through. I imagine he's probably put the entire country through, but I'm not going to speak for everyone else. But he's put me through a hell of a lot of stress. His tweets that he is making, that whereas he means well, I know what he's trying to say, but if he'd spend 5 seconds thinking about what he's tweeting first and phrase it properly, he could communicate put across the same message better and without stressing everyone out. That, and then all the changes that he's making, going to having a trade war with China, going to war with Canada and Mexico, and on, and turning the markets upside down constantly, and then having the issue with the border wall and the government shutdown. Government shutdown isn't helping the markets either. And I keep thinking to myself, as long as he comes through, I'm willing to put up with all of this. I know that in the long run, Donald Trump is right. that we need to renegotiate a lot of the contracts that the United States made with other countries regarding trade. I know that we need to do that. I know that we need to have a good border security also. But the thing of it is that he has to come through. This is all, whether or not I vote for him in 2020 depends on whether or not he keeps his promises, particularly on the border. That was his number one. The number one thing that he talked about when he came down the elevator, escalator, stairs, whatever, is border security and putting up a wall. We're going to build a wall. Mexico's going to pay for it. I don't care if Mexico pays for it, but we got to have the wall. Why? Because he promised. Just that simple. I'm not going to put up with all the stress he's putting me through if he's going to fail. And I'm not going to listen to any excuses from him. If he comes back and says, well, I tried, but Congress wouldn't. Nope, sorry, not interested. If he fails on the wall, he does not get my vote. The wall is a make or break in terms of whether or not he gets my vote. Period. The rest of China, maybe. You know, if he goofs things up with China, which I doubt, I think it's going to be kind of hard to do that. But if he does, maybe. But the wall for sure, because he's putting people through a whole lot of stress and unneeded stress. Now, if he goes ahead and he does an executive order and the executive order is overturned by the courts, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear Donald Trump come back and say, well, I tried, but the courts wouldn't let me. No, I'm not listening to it. If anybody runs against him on the Republican side in 2020, I'll be voting for them instead of Donald Trump. It's just that simple. So I'm not going to put up with the tons and tons of stress he puts on me each and every day and then watch him not keep his promises. Basically turn into a regular politician. I'm not going to do it. It's just that simple. Anyways, so when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the Ayn Rand Lexicon. And then after that, we're going to go into the 30 ways that narcissists can try to manipulate when we come back. All right, thank you very much. And from the Ayn Rand Lexicon, the concept of the day's economic power versus political power. A disastrous intellectual package deal put over on us by the theoreticians of statism is the equation of economic power with political power. You've heard it expressed in such bromides as, quote, a hungry man is not free, unquote, or, quote, it makes no difference to a worker whether he takes orders from a businessman or from a bureaucrat, unquote. Most people accept these equivocations, and yet they know that the poorest laborer in America is freer and more secure than the richest commissar in Soviet Russia. What is the basic, the essential, the crucial principle that differentiates freedom from slavery? It is the principle of voluntary action versus physical coercion or compulsion. The difference between political power and any other kind of social power, between a government and any private organization, is the fact that a government holds a legal monopoly on the use of physical force. What is economic power? It is the power to produce and to trade what one has produced. In a free economy where no man or group of men can use physical coercion against anyone, economic power can be achieved only by voluntary means, by the voluntary choice and agreement of all those who participate in the process of production and trade. In a free market, all prices, wages, and profits are determined not by the arbitrary whim of the rich or the poor, not by anyone's greed or by anyone's need, but by the law of supply and demand. The mechanism of a free market, it reflects and sums up all the economic choices and decisions made by all the participants. Men trade their goods or services by mutual consent to mutual advantage, according to their own independent, uncoerced judgment. A man can grow rich only if he's able to offer better values, better products or services at lower price than others are able to offer. Wealth in a free market is achieved by a free, general, democratic vote, by the sales and the purchases of every individual who takes part in the economic life of the country. Whenever you buy one product rather than another, you are voting for the success of some manufacturer. And in this type of voting, every man votes only on those matters which he is qualified to judge, on his own preferences, interests, and needs. No one has the power to decide for others or to substitute his judgment for theirs. No one has the power to appoint himself, quote, the voice of the public, unquote, and to leave the public voiceless and disenfranchised. Now let me define the difference between economic power and political power. Economic power is exercised by means of a positive, by offering men a reward, an incentive, a payment, a value. Political power is exercised by means of a negative, by the threat of punishment, injury, imprisonment, destruction. The businessman's tool is values. The bureaucrat's tool is fear. Evading the difference between production and looting, they called the businessman a robber. Evading the difference between freedom and compulsion, they called him a slave driver. Evading the difference between reward and terror, they called him an exploiter. Evading the difference between paychecks and guns, they called him an autocrat. Evading the difference between trade and force, they called him a tyrant. The most crucial issue they had to evade was the difference between the earned and the unearned. You had said that you saw no difference between economic and political power, between the power of money and the power of guns, no difference between reward and punishment, no difference between purchase and plunder, no difference between pleasure and fear, no difference between life and death. You are learning the difference now. So one of the big flaws in this whole thing about economic power and political power is absence of the gold standard. She's right about everything partially, but in order to make those things real, in order for there to be, and that brings me to my second issue with what she's talking about, she uses the word freedom and free instead of independent. Makes a huge difference, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. But with the gold standard, you're able to exercise independent judgment and be independent and actually have a market, a working market. In Keynesian economics, which is the system we have now, the United States of America is not a capitalist country. No country in the world is capitalist. None of them are socialist either. There are some that pretend to be socialist, but they're not. And those economies don't work. And the reason they don't work is because the whole world is on the same economic platform, if you will, and that is Keynesian economics. And if capitalism properly understood is a gold standard, Keynes properly understood is a paper standard. The whole idea of Keynes' economic system was so that we would have ever-increasing prosperity. No boom and bust cycles, no recessions, no depressions. It has failed, and failed miserably. Okay, so that's where I say one of the prima facie cases for change is moving from Keynesian economics to a gold standard economy. But anyways, the whole world has to do it. We can't in the United States say, hey, you know what? You guys have fun with the Keynes economics. You have fun with paper. We're moving to gold. You can't do it because the countries trade with each other, and they have to have a universal system or universal standard or standards with which to conduct that trade. You can't have tried to have a gold standard economy going to a paper economy and then trying to figure out, well, how much paper is valued, is gold worth, that kind of thing. It doesn't work. Same thing with socialism. Venezuela decides to go socialist, but the problem is the rest of the world is a Keynesian economy. And as much as fairness that Venezuela wants, they can't, unless they're going to force the rest of the world to comply and be socialist, then Venezuela's economy is going to suffer. Okay, because they have to, there's markets in play. Venezuela has a lot of oil. But whether or not Venezuela is able to capitalize on that depends on what the prices for oil are, and that's subject to the market. And so you have the market forces at work there, and you have Venezuela trying to force situations in a world that has at least some independence to it, and it doesn't work. It's the same thing with China. It's the same thing. Any left-wing economy, any socialist economy that has anything going for it is working simply because they acknowledge Keynesian economics and are operating within that system. China is a classic example of that. So is Vietnam. They're reasonably successful, even though they consider themselves to be socialist systems, because they're willing to acknowledge instead of fight the world economy. So when I come back, wait a minute. Let's go back to, I was going to tell you about the independent versus fear. I want to read some of this and use the word independent instead of the word free, not fear. Here, quote, a hungry man is not independent. Well, they say hungry man is not free. Let me skip, because that's a quote from Marx or something like that. Let me see where else. Blah, 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 blah. There we go. Yet they know that the poorest laborer in America is more independent and more secure than the richest commissar in Soviet Russia. Okay. Let's see here. What is the essential, the crucial principle that differentiates independence from slavery? It is the principle of voluntary action versus physical coercion or compulsion. Let me see if we have. Okay. In an independent economy instead of a free economy, where no man or group of men can use physical coercion against anyone, economic power can be achieved only by voluntary means. And I think that gives you an idea that, again, free is vague. It is an incredibly vague notion, whereas independence is much more specific, much more pointed, and rhetorically much more effective than use of the word free. And that's so she should have used the word independent. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from, let's see, where is it? 30 Covert Emotional Manipulation Tactics. And these emotional manipulation tactics are the tactics of the left. When I come back. J Okay, thank you very much. So when I left this last week, he had kind of did an intro. The author had did an intro about giving some demonstrations about if you find yourself in a relationship in which this is happening, that's happening, then you're being manipulated. And it was kind of an intro to the 30 covert emotional manipulation tactics themselves. So we're going to go chapter 3. When you know what a man wants you to know who he is, when you know what a man wants you to know who he is and how to move him. I think that's misquoted. But number 1, intermittent reinforcement. The more infrequently the crumbs of love are offered, the more hooked you are. You become conditioned, like a rat in a cage. Unknown quote. Intermittent reinforcement is an extremely powerful and effective manipulation tactic. In fact, psychology experts consider it the most powerful motivator in existence. Using this tactic, the manipulator motivates the victim to behave, think, or feel the way he or she wants them to. Intermittent reinforcement occurs when a manipulator gives his victim positive reinforcement, attention, praise, appreciation, affection, sex, adoration, declarations of love, only on a random basis. They may give positive reinforcement in response to a behavior they're trying to increase, or they can withhold it to create uncertainty, anxiety, and longing in the victim. Intermittent reinforcement creates a climate of doubt, fear, and anxiety that compels the victim to persistently seek acts of positive reinforcement from the manipulator that will alleviate their angst. When the reward of positive reinforcement is given, it is very powerful. It floods the brain with dopamine and other feel-good neurotransmitters and hormones. It creates addiction. If you're a victim of this tactic, you will sense the manipulator is withdrawing. He or she is not giving you the attention and affection that they used to, and you will fear that something is wrong and that you are losing them. If you ask them if something is wrong, they will deny it or blame you. At some point, the manipulator will act once again like the attentive, romantic, interested, and loving person they once were. Your anxiety and doubt are relieved, and you are on top of the world. But then they withdraw again, and you are consumed with anxiety once more. By using intermittent reinforcement, the manipulator will have you riding an emotional roller coaster, your moods and emotional well-being dependent on whether he or she is withholding from you or rewarding you. The manipulator does this on purpose to increase his or her power and control over you and make you ever more desperate for their love, attention, or approval. You will have become the proverbial lab rat living for a randomly dispensed morsel. The rat thinks of nothing else, and neither will you. The bond with the manipulator will become stronger in response to intermittent reinforcement, along with your desire to please them and your fear of losing them. This is malicious manipulation at its worst. Excuse me. Intermittent reinforcement is explored in more depth in Chapter 5. Number 2, negative reinforcement. Using the tactic of negative reinforcement, the manipulator stops doing something you don't like when you start doing something he or she does like. This makes it more likely that you will do what they like in the future. For example, you behave in some way the manipulator does not want you to. Perhaps you go out with your friends on Friday nights or refuse to participate in some sexual activity you are averse to. In response, they engage in behavior that hurts you, such as withholding affection or giving you the silent treatment. The manipulator stops withholding affection or giving you the silent treatment when you start acting the way he wants, such as promising to give up your Friday get-togethers or engaging in the sexual activity he desires. It's very simple. The manipulator knows that you are likely to give in eventually in order to stop his or her hurtful action. It is an effective way to get you to behave the way they want you to and to make you more likely to behave that way again. And it seems to me that that what's going on right now with the budget resolution and the government shutdown is a demonstration of that kind of behavior going on right there. Number 3, backing into an emotional corner. You always overreact. You're unstable. You have a problem with anger. You're crazy. A manipulator will say such things after intentionally causing you to have an emotional meltdown. The purpose is to create a confusing and emotional scene that will distract you from an issue you confronted the manipulator about. The issue instead becomes your apparent emotional instability. This tactic also allows the manipulator to gain more power and control. Here's an example of how this tactic is put into play. You're upset by something the manipulator did and you confront him or her about it. Perhaps he did something that aroused your suspicion or angered you. The manipulator does not want to confront the issue at hand, so he obfuscates it by turning the focus onto you by using your emotions against you. He does not mention the issue you brought up. Instead, he immediately shifts the focus to your apparent insecurity or jealousy or suspicious nature, which he says is unacceptable. You become defensive, frustrated, and upset. The manipulator seizes on your emotional upset and says something you already know I won't tolerate, you won't, quote, you already know I won't tolerate you raising your voice at me, quote, unquote. Or, quote, is it PMS time again, unquote. Or, quote, you're not trying to pick another fight, are you, unquote. Or, quote, I can see you're headed toward one of your meltdowns, unquote. This will increase your frustration and make you become even more emotional. Then the manipulator will tell you that he can't deal with this anymore, that he's becoming tired of your drama and your overreaction. At this point, if you haven't done so already, you will have an emotional meltdown and then collapse into frustrated sobs. Then the manipulator will announce that you're unstable or crazy or abusive or that you have an anger management problem and says that he will leave you if you can't get yourself under control. The manipulator backed you into an emotional corner. Predictably, you came out swinging. The manipulator will storm off in a feigned anger and begin a protracted episode of the silent treatment, which is yet another way to avoid the real issue and another manipulation tactic. You are ashamed at how you acted and feel disappointed in yourself. You can't understand why you keep going off the deep end. You will come to believe that you actually do have an emotional problem, one that is sabotaging your previously wonderful relationship. You vow to yourself not to let it happen again, but suppressing your frustration only guarantees that your buttons will be even easier to push next time. You unwittingly enter a vicious cycle with no way out. When you've been backed into an emotional corner, acting out does not mean you're crazy or that you have an anger management problem. It means you're a normal person reacting to an intensely stressful situation. But when you have an emotional reaction to that stress, you're made to believe you have the problem. Your emotional reactions to manipulation are not the problem. The manipulation is the problem. This is psychological warfare at its lowest. And so I think it's got a good demonstration of the type of tactics that are used not only politically, national politics, state politics, etc., but in our everyday lives with the people around us. It can be relatives, it can be neighbors, coworkers, etc. And very often these tactics have a socio or political aim to them. And I'm sure if you think about it for a little while, that you will be able to realize some people in your life that this particular part of the chapter is talking about or speaking to. So I'm going to leave it there. There's 27 more of these tactics to go through. And I think what I'm probably going to go ahead and do is instead of going through them over a period of weeks, we'll just go through a few each and every day so we can kind of stay on subject here. But for right now, it brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you very much for listening and have a great day.